Hey everybody, I'm John Paller, Executive Steward for Opolis. We're building a next generation employment ecosystem for the self-sovereign worker. So we get a lot of questions about this topic, and we get a lot of questions around what the heck is a self-sovereign worker. So I'm gonna basically introduce you to the topic and explain why it's relevant to you and pretty much to everybody else, and why this is such an important component of the Web3 architecture and framework that we need in order to move everything forward, even in the near term. So for some context here, um, it's important to understand the headspace of the worker. So when I say worker, I mean people getting a paycheck, people out there doing work for companies or who are independent contractors, or might even be entrepreneurs, but work is a major component of our life. But this is thinking about everything from the perspective of the workers. So workers, the current epoch of employment was designed in the Industrial Revolution. This is pushing 100 years ago, where we've got an employer corporation that paternalistically manages its employees. And this dynamic, fast forward, 100 plus years, has turned into a lot of dissatisfied people. When you look at the numbers and you look at the projections, we're looking at over 50% of people projected to be participating in gig or freelance work within 5 years. So this lines up very well with 53% of existing Gen Zers are already freelancing full-time. So what does this indicate? This indicates that individuals are not interested in just selling their time and attention to the old school, get a job, go get handcuffed to a desk and spend the next 30 years. I mean, that social construct, that social contract is over. So fluidity, high velocity are really accelerating, and these numbers are just going to continue to grow. Now, from the other side of the coin, when you think about what employers want to manage risk. Risk equals cost. So they're looking to manage risk and cost, and as a result of that, they're shifting large portions of their workforce to freelance labor, gig economy folks, whatever they can to keep things more flexible so they can scale up and scale down as they choose. Now, in a crisis or something like this COVID-19 pandemic, this has been very clear that people who had flexible labor pools just shut them off. Why? Because it manages cost, and it does so very compliantly and very low risk for them. What they really want at the end of the day is an agile labor force. Now, what everybody wants is really, well, they really both want a lot of the same stuff. Flexibility is the key, but the values that underpin the kind of dynamics and decisions that are made on behalf of workers used to be safety and security. This is why it was so attractive for the 40-hour work week, right? But then you look at the new world of work, and safety and security are important. I'm not saying that we're giving those up as core values. I'm saying we're building on top of them. Now, freedom and flexibility are really the main drivers behind decision-making when it comes to employment. Forgive me, my screen is like not shifting. There we go. And as I mentioned earlier, both sides desire the flexibility. So flexibility matters because it's less risk. It's less commitment, which leads to less cost. Margins are shrinking for many, many businesses, and labor is the #1 expense for most businesses. So when you look at those factors, managing labor and employment costs is the #1 most important thing and focus for most CEOs on a global basis. So that being said, it's not that dissimilar, though, in the flexibility that the worker wants. The workers don't have any sort of belief in the idea that there's loyalty anymore, because there really isn't when it comes to employment. So why put any worry about that? They don't. They want flexibility. They want the choice to work from where, with whom, and how much they choose. So the problem with that conclusion, so if flexibility and freedom and risk management and cost mitigation are all really important components, then what's the problem? Well, the problem is we don't actually have an employment framework that's designed for this high fluidity future of work. We just don't. Everything was designed in the context of a corporation being the responsible party for employees. So how do we solve that? Well, we're going to get into that. So the outdated options that we currently have are this old school employment, which is just the W-2 employment. We've all done for you. You give me a W-2 every year. You take care of all the filings and all the compliance and procuring healthcare and whatever. But I better hope that I like what you offer. I haven't seen a lot of situations where the benefits offered by a company have any correlation to the quality of the work or my interest in the work, but they're still providing it. And then there's these outsourced options with a PEO, a professional employer organization, which in a lot of ways actually adds another risk vector. So there's another central point of failure here, the PEO itself. Transparency is somewhat limited, a lot limited, and still this is a B2B arrangement. So in other words, the corporation is going to outsource some of these activities to a PEO. So the decisions are still being made by the business. The employees are not being given any sort of involvement in any decision making. Now, if I don't like any of this, of course I can strike out on my own and that's fine. But I've got to take on all of the risk, all of the procurement, time, challenges, research, everything. And at the end, I have zero purchasing power. So it's much more complicated to be independent or in business for myself versus just letting, an employer do it for me, right? If I want to actually just live my life, being an entrepreneur is quite difficult. I mean, forget just the business, just the administration of the business is difficult by itself. My slides are slow. All right. But then, so I think it's been identified that these trends are going to happen. Okay. So the world of work is going to become more fluid. Everything's going to be, it's going to be commonplace that people have multiple jobs. There's a lot of agreement on this front. So this isn't something that I'm just coming up with, but then the wrong solutions show up. So solving problems doesn't necessarily mean that the way that we've solved problems historically is going to be the way that we solve problems going forward. Now, what I mean by that is legislatively, we've attempted to solve this problem in California, as an example, with a piece of legislation called AB 5. Now, AB 5, for those that don't know, requires platform companies to classify their workers as W-2. Now, when this happens, this brings a lot more risk and a lot more cost as a result of risk to the employment experience for these companies. Now, none of these tech companies want this. Uber is fighting this tooth and nail. Why? Because it's more expensive. They're essentially being classified as a taxi company versus a tech company. And all of the compliance and regulatory issues that come up with this, the risk, unemployment costs, whatever it might be, it's incredibly expensive to administer this. Now, I say that it's a 1980s approach to solving a 2020 problem. The irony of this is a lot of the people that they're supposedly helping by making them W-2 employees don't really want that. Some of them do. Some of them want the Uber or Lyft or whoever to take the responsibility. But a lot of them are like, well, wait, I work for both of these companies. And then I don't really want to be told how much to work or what. I don't want to be controlled. I don't want to work for them. I thought that I was working kind of when I wanted on a more flexible schedule. Remember, the core value of flexibility being the key. This AB 5 is going to remove, in a lot of contexts, the flexibility that these workers seek. So this is not democratizing work. Okay, so if the goal of platform companies like Uber and Lyft was to democratize work, this solution to the existing problems, the existing lack of framework to allow these dynamic relationships to exist, isn't the solution. It's actually exacerbating the problem in a lot of respects. So our vision at Opolis is to build a platform that suits the future of work, this sort of generally accepted future of high velocity, high frequency, variable sources of revenues, variable periods of work, whatever it might be, whatever I might want to define my world of work to look like for the individual. So to build a quasi-public utility infrastructure that allows individuals to access and administer employment, but do so being self-employed, or as we say, self-sovereignly employed in a network or cooperative setting. Again, slow slides. Some are fast, some are slow. Okay. All right, now to build this platform, so kind of bringing it back to Web3 and how does this all work? In order for this to work, you have to have both technology and legal merged together. Employment is the single most common thread that we all do. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. It's commercially, it's something that we all do. We all experience employment, earning money, earning a living to sustain our families. But technologically and legally, all of this has to come together because employment is the nexus of where I believe the future of work or even Web3 technology will merge with the existing sort of infrastructure or compliance frameworks that we have to abide by. Now, for purposes of building this tech, if Opolis were to try to go out and do all of this on our own, it would literally take us $100 million and probably 10 years to build it. Now, the good news is a lot of the components, a lot of the pieces and parts that we need are already being built in the ecosystem. So Opolis is a great example of the Web3 Legos that we talk about quite a bit and how we're creating a sustainable ecosystem of shareable revenue that's transparent for users, user designed, employee focused and centric, and one that creates a long-term incentive for collaboration by all stakeholders, not just tech contributors, but also the users and members themselves of the employment cooperative. Now, currently we have a whole bunch of technology collaborators that are coming into the mix. And I'm just going to kind of speed through some of this because, it's important that you understand kind of how goodness, why is this so difficult right now? Okay. So worker identity and document vault. So Web3 identity. The goal would be to have portable KYC built into this if and when we can get that, cleared with state and federal resources or even internationally. But we've got partnerships there happening. We've got governance frameworks that we're partnering with. We've got benefits, shared services, accounting, market, exchanges, even getting access to your freelancer funds early. So a lot of people have challenges getting paid, right? As a freelancer, I got to send a bill out waiting 30, 60, 90 days to get paid from my client. Well, a lot of that can be solved by tokenizing the invoices. A public utility infrastructure for a job engine. So not a third-party job board, but one that's built into the ecosystem as a loss leader for free. And really in its aggregate, we call it this silly thing called Opolitron, but it's like, if you think back to the Voltron cartoon, where it really took the unique skills of different parties to build this larger sort of entity. That's what we're building. So, and we call this apparatus the employment commons. Now, you can call it whatever you want, but the commons is its brand. But it's really an employment cooperative. Okay. So legally speaking, it's set up as an employment co-op with a whole bunch of technology to maintain the benevolence on top of it. And everything is employee centered. It's structurally, legally, and technologically benevolent, and it's low cost. So we're currently working on figuring out exactly how the costs will look for sustainability purposes. We're looking at a couple of different iterations of bonding curves for transparency and predictability, and again, non-arbitrary decisions on how the costs are being structured. But yeah, it's everything that we're doing is about creating this sort of public utility infrastructure feel, and really maintaining a public good of administration for employment and a shared services framework through network. And by the way, while I'm on the topic, currently there is no cost at all to join Opolis or to receive services. So every new member will receive at least 12 months free. And if and when there is a fee, it will all be done transparently, like I mentioned earlier, likely through a bonding curve. All right, so we're working on a whole bunch of pilots. So this is sort of Q1 and Q2 stuff, but essentially we're in discussions with the state of Colorado, MakerDAO, Lendroid, Gitcoin, and the state of Wyoming to launch pilots. Now, COVID-19 is put us back a little bit on planning for some of this. The state of Colorado had obviously some other things to attend to in the month of March and April, but we should be getting back to those conversations here very shortly. Yeah, as far as any of the other sort of things that we might talk about, the reason why this all makes sense for people and for sustainability, business models are a thing that we don't talk about a lot in Web3 because it's like bad or something to try to make money. Well, in our world, we think about sustainability. It's not that expensive for our ecosystem to provide services to any one individual. In other words, the incremental costs don't go up a ton. So for example, if we were to have 1% of payroll, scaling it down to super tiny per month. I mean, it's always going to be on a percentage or a consumption basis, likely because, globally speaking, people make different amounts. So charging some flat rate wouldn't probably make a lot of sense. But the margins on this, even on $10, is still very, very high. So sustainability is a big feature for what we're building. So that is the summary of kind of what we're working on here at Opolis. If you have more questions about something specific with respect to how exactly we're doing some of these components, what specific technologies are going to be implemented, feel free to show up to my Q&A. We've obviously got that coming up as well. You can reach out to us on our socials or reach me on Twitter, and I'd be happy to engage you anytime, any place. So thank you very much.